old waterhouse over the health. There was an ancient crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water. But it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of this incident it was just a shadow of its former self, and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids played over the heath, and they all told us it spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer, in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were really responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time, so we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us. And so, a half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were off. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all really excited as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gran's blackberry pies were the best. Gran's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other, then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories as they always did, half because they liked scaring us, and a half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked and still does so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wives' tale urban legend that we all knew about the waterhouse. The story goes, once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were really nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead, and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time, and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang. Months, although it was never proven how. The bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later. A few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse, mysterious hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell like aging river weeds was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not too far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, but the locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence further away from the waterhouse, us younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute before being rounded up by the older boys. Up put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field, where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy, sweet blackberries and splashing in the river, and soon the sun was getting low and it was time for home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering, laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slightly, but being as it was getting later, we were feeling wearier and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close. like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the 3 older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there, Broove." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh. But A was straight-faced. I said, "I'm going to have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A, we've got to..." Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother, when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the 2 boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run. And we did. B picking up my tiny wheelchair, folding it up while running. A grabbing the other 2 kids' hands and following B, and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. A kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, A?" "Y, yellow eyes, H, hairy face." All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the waterhouse as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. H just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell. And as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face, or find out what it actually was. But us kids didn't go near the waterhouse for a long time after. The murder of the Groene family. A deranged pedo named Joseph Edward Duncan was already on the run from the cops for a past sexual assault. He was incredibly charming and manipulative, and was truly pure evil. He camped outside a family's rural home, unseen by them. He picked it out after driving past it and seeing children's toys outside. He watched them from afar, got to know their routine with the intent of kidnapping the children, 10-year-old Dylan, 8-year-old Shasta. Jed found the lock on the door was broken, entered the home in the middle of the night and tied up the mom, dad, and teenage son. He put Shasta and Dylan in his car and killed the rest of the family with a hammer. He traveled around various campsites and cabins with Shasta and Dylan captive, sexually abusing, torturing, and raping them. He eventually shot Dylan, but Shasta talked him out of killing her. Jed ended up telling her she taught him how to love. The scariest part is a CCTV footage of Jed and Shasta at a gas station, because you could easily believe they were just a normal dad and a grumpy daughter if you were an onlooker. Eventually, he took her to a diner where he was finally apprehended when a waitress noticed something was up, and Shasta was saved after 7 weeks in his clutches. As he was dragged away, he called to her, "Promise me you'll visit me in prison." And she said she would. I don't know if she ever did. Jed was put on death row and found to be guilty of 3 previous child murders. He died a few months ago from cancer. But the worst part of it all is how horrible Shasta's life has been afterwards. Drug addiction, in and out of jail, losing her children, etc. Just the most horrifying story ever. I grew up in a funeral home. I helped out in the office. When I was about 15, we got a call from a man whose wife and infant baby had been murdered in cold blood. There were very few clues. It made headlines. Cops set up surveillance at the viewing. It was heartbreaking, as the mother was holding the baby in her arms. I was asked to take the flower cards and periodically get the husband and ask if he recognized the names. I then photocopied them and put them back. I did it because I was a kid. People knew me and I was unobtrusive. I talked to the husband quite a bit. He seemed devastated and shaken. The cops told me they had an eyewitness to someone leaving the house the day of the murder. The witness was a 3-year-old girl. She recognized the man leaving. It was the husband's best friend. Turns out that the friend and the husband had made a pact to kill each other's families and run off with their secretaries. The little girl identified the friend, and I guess one of them cracked. They both went to jail on multiple counts, all on the testimony of a 3-year-old. I still cannot believe to this day that that man stood right beside me multiple times and I had no clue. I don't think I ever looked at life the same way after that. James Bulger. He was just 2 years old and with his mom running errands. She let go of his hand to pay the cashier and he wandered away. 2 10-year-old boys spotted him, lured him toward them, took him by the hands, and led him away. They took him to a remote location, pushing and kicking at him the whole time. Some people questioned the 2 kids with the crying toddler, but they lied, saying he was their brother, and nobody intervened further. They took him to a secluded spot and tortured him. I don't want to recount the torture details, it's just too gruesome. They left his body on some railroad tracks, hoping that being run over by a train would make it look like an accident. He was found days later, his body severed in half by a train. The boys were caught and became the youngest convicted murderers in British history. Security footage from the day they took James shows them watching children, picking out a target. And they were just kids themselves. They were released at 18. One of them is back in jail for possessing child abuse photos on his computer. The most terrifying thing about this for me is that my own son is only 2 now, and James's murderers were just children too. It was premeditated and intentional and entirely random. Just a momentary lapse in attention, and he became a target of 2 murderous children. Children. To think that children younger than my stepson are capable of such a thing. Ugh, everything about this case is just horrifying. I work midnight shift at a gas station, and I have for quite a while at various stations in different areas with varying levels of criminal activity. I have regulars, of course. I'm a small-statured woman, as is my partner the other half of the week, and we've always been partners. So these regulars often worry about us and keep watch on creepy occurrences when they can. I had one man who worked in the metro an hour away, who would stop in every morning for his cigarettes. He never smiled or seemed friendly, and as I often do, I tried to think of what I could do that might make him smile one day. It took many months, but I finally pulled it off by having his cigarettes ready on the counter and already scanned for him to pay for as he walked in. He smiled and then asked me, "Do you ever get scared on the night shift? You small girl, is not safe." I said I sometimes did, but we could lock the doors and hide if we had to, and that the provincial police think state troopers, if you're American, had a station close by and came in often to get their highway vehicles washed. I had a good rapport with those police. He nodded and then told me a story about when he first moved to our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and child back in the late 80s, early 90s. He fell asleep at work one night at the gas station he worked midnights at. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was all right. He was fine, he said. What was the problem? He was sorry he fell asleep. His manager screamed that it was fine he fell asleep to look outside. All of their motor oil was missing and the outside of the place was a mess. The thieves had come and swiped all the oil and left him be because he slept through the entire thing, and then moved down the road to the next station for an encore. At that station, the clerk was awake and fought back, so the thieves stabbed him to death and left him to bleed out. When he finished telling me this, he concluded with, "If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door and do it. It might save your life." I don't work at that station anymore, but I think about that guy all the time and wonder how his grandkids are. Here is a link to an article talking about how that poor other clerk's killers were finally found 25 years later. The other night, my wife took our child out for several hours. In that time, I wrapped up work, then left to get dinner around 4:30 p.m. Got home around 6:30, played with our dog and did a few chores. Then, when my wife got home about 7:30, we relaxed a bit, and I headed for bed about 9 p.m., usually up early with our kid. Maybe 2 minutes after crawling into bed, I get a text from my wife with a picture of our dry erase menu board on our fridge. See, usually at the start of the week, my wife will fill out a rough menu for dinners that week. I remembered seeing it earlier in the day, and it was filled out as expected. The picture she sent was of the menu all scrambled up, like the letters were all moved everywhere, with random words and squiggles throughout. Some of it was her writing, but others were incomplete words, or rewritten words in handwriting that wasn't hers or mine. This freaked us out, as our 1-year-old certainly didn't do it. The county sheriff showed up and swept the house and found nothing. Nothing was out of place or missing either. He was spooked by it a bit too. He said they never get a call out in the country where we are, and recommended we change our locks. We hadn't, as the couple we bought our home from were elderly. So, we did that night. See the 2 photos. The one is an example of her writing. The other is the actual scrambled menu with her question she wrote on the bottom and texted to me.